Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, you had a video this weekend on Instagram wherein you did the scroll through a sick house. And for a very brief moment in time, I thought to myself, is Will upgrading? Is Will considering moving into this ridiculously nice house? And then I realized, given, kind of what you're doing on the side work-wise, it was probably related to that. But for about 5 to 10 seconds in time on your Instagram story, I definitely thought, whoa, Will's about to pass me in life.
No. Yeah, I'm doing some real estate videography for my family. They wanted me to get out there and shoot some stuff for them for a minute. So me and John got out there kind of on like 1 day notice. So yeah, Signature Homes in Nashville and Birmingham. If you guys want to check them out, I don't want to do like free pub for them or whatever, but they've been super cool and they do beautiful, amazing stuff. And I rarely interact with it because I've been, doing this, working in television, but got to kind of lend my services to them. And it is kind of like mind blowing. It's kind of like you see like members of your family that when you see them in like a work context, you're like, oh wow, you're really like good at your job. That's crazy. I never see you like this.
Yeah, I get some of that now too because my brother's in real estate, and so I'll see some of the homes that he'll have pictures of on his social media, and I'll look at these houses. And I'm like, dang, you're selling that? That's pretty sick. That's a sick house. I would love to live in something like that one day. Not that I don't like our house, but do you ever go down that Zillow rabbit hole of just looking at houses that are maybe not totally out of your price range, but just 1 to 2 tiers out of your price range, and just thinking to yourself about the life you could live in one of those houses?
Yes, I actually had talked about this recently with my stepbrother because, whenever you go on like a scenic trip, it's like, what would it be like to live here? You look at Zillow,
Yep.
but now you can do that on Airbnb and actually just stay there. And it's like the most dangerous thing. Like, dude, there's a castle out in Tennessee that's like $200 or $300 a night that I've wanted to rent for like 6 months because I've seen it. Like, I could just stay in a castle for 2 days. So yeah, having the internet and being able to see how other people live, pretty crazy.
$300 a night is cheap for a castle, no?
Yeah, man. I mean, what's the going rate on a castle? I think it's a buyer's market, really, if you think about it.
It's a good point. It's a really, really good point. That's how you know you've been listening to a podcast with two guys on the other side of 30. We're talking about going down Zillow rabbit
Castle
holes.
rentals.
Exactly. All right, we have a great pod today. Great pod. David Hale is coming up in a bit to talk a bunch of different ACC storylines, and we've got Lad of the Week. But before we do that, and by the way, we're going to be predicting the 12-team college football playoff field. A little bit of a two-parter for everybody. It's May. It's fine. Whatever. I'll explain kind of the premise of that in just a second here. But first, I've talked about Dabble before. These NBA playoffs have been absolutely crazy. If you don't have a piece of the action, Dabble is the place to do it. They're going to hook you up. Nobody's doing it like they are in the DFS space. They've wasted no time making a name for themselves. Dabble's social function is second to none, and they offer a wide variety of sports-making picks, including those NBA playoffs, MLB. We've got a lot of stuff going on in the sporting world, even though there is no college football right now. Use that promo code SDS2 when you sign up. Receive $25 in bonus cash. No deposit required. Again, that's promo code SDS2 for $25 in bonus cash, courtesy of the good folks at Dabble. Will, I love doing the 12-team playoff predictions in a way that I didn't think I did when we expanded from 4 to 12. I didn't realize how excited I was going to be, but I woke up this morning, on Wednesday morning, little hitch my giddy up, knowing we're laying it all out today. And this is a process that once you kind of put the wheels in motion to do an idea like this, your brain goes in a million different directions. But that's what I've spent all day putting together, is what I think the 12-team playoff field will look like. And I like doing this in May. Post-spring window, it's closed. We're going to have a few different transfer decisions that are still going to trickle in because guys that have already entered the portal, they can still pick a school. Fall injuries, that can still happen. Please, nothing as significant as CJ Baxter was last year. But that just means we get more podcast content out of it. Hope he makes a full return. But I like doing this now so that I don't second guess myself with all this stuff in August. And I'll go to media days and I'm like, I heard this person say this, and I really trust their opinion. I want to be the person that people trust. I want to be the person that people are piggybacking on. So a couple of caveats here. I'm going to do predictions based on where they'll be seated, and I'm going to assume that we're getting rid of the first round buys, only going to the highest ranked conference champs.
Okay.
So I am assuming we're just going to do this based on the normal seeding, right? So we're not going to have a situation where Boise State is, oh my God, well, Boise State's one of the 4 highest ranked conference champs. I guess they're the 4 seed, or they ended up being the 3 seed, actually. The 3 seed, not even the 4 seed. But I am going to assume that this is changed, okay? And that might be a little bit risky. Maybe we'll have to tweak some of this, but this has to have unanimous support to change it. And that hasn't. Heather Dinich, I know, was talking about this on McAfee about how there isn't quite that push just yet, even though it seems like a whole lot of people in that room want that change. But are we okay with doing that and kind of adjusting for this potential change in year 2 of the 12-team playoff?
Yes, absolutely. And this is like a little bit of a side tangent, but about I guess 3 or 4 years late, I started watching Drive to Survive, the F1 show, and that has given me a little bit of like I guess perspective because the thing that's crazy about that show or I guess that sport is that the contracts are like a max of about 3 years. So there are people racing for a team that has already moved on from them, and they are only there for like a year, and they're having to do press conferences with the team owners, and they're just like, so you're not bringing him back next year. Why not? And the guy's sitting there like, yeah, he's just not very fast. And there's like 5 or 6 races left. And the dude's like, huh? And so like, point being, I think the concept, this is just how sports are going to work kind of going forward, where to your point, it's like, we're not exactly sure what the rules and regulations are going to be, but at least give them credit that they know that last year's format does need a little bit of tweaking, and they're not just going to kind of sit on their hands and be like, this is the new, it's untouchable. Like, I do think there's going to be like a small change to every format going forward until they get this right and everyone's happy, which is never.
We're adapt or die. Well, let me start over. We are adapt or die guys.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to anticipate some change. I do think it comes. I was thinking about this, though, and correct me if you think I'm a little bit off here, but it wouldn't surprise me if the ACC is the one that's resisting this, because you might think, wait a minute, didn't we just watch the ACC have a champion that didn't get a first round bye? Why would they be the ones wanting to hold on to this seeding that puts so much emphasis on conference champs? I would answer that by saying the ACC just has to beat out a group of 5 conference champ. And in theory, they should do that more times than not. So last year should be the outlier. That they shouldn't assume, well, oh my gosh, Boise State or whatever the group of 5 champ is going to beat us out every single year. But actually fielding a top 4 team, which is what the ACC would need to do to get a first round bye if that stipulation is taken out. And we just do this based on who the best teams are, rank them 1 through 12. It's maybe a bit tougher for the ACC, right? 4 consecutive years that the ACC hasn't had a team finish inside of the top 4 of the final AP poll. Just saying.
I would ask if they were Florida State, but that's kind of the point. Not to go too deep into that, but that's the question I've always asked, right? Is how many of these teams in these conferences are truly contenders? Or with the ACC, it's like Clemson, FSU. It's kind of the end of the list in terms of here recently. There are some teams with money. There are some teams with Bill Belichick and his girlfriend, but no one that's really actually done it, you know?
Exactly. 0-8 in those New Year's 6 bowls / playoff bowls in the 2020s, a stat that you will hear later on in this podcast with David Hale. So let's just assume that we're ranking teams based on where they will be in that final playoff poll when we're saying this is what the field looks like. And we're going to try and not necessarily do it without figuring out if this team or that team is winning a conference championship and getting this seed or that seed. It gets really confusing, as we know from those weekly selection shows wherein they insisted on doing that. And I really think part of this anticipated change is just so that they won't have to do that anymore, because it was bad. It was really bad. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to start at 12, and I'm going to just kind of make the case what sold me on this being a playoff team. But I will say here, I don't want to pick a title winner just yet. This is just predicting the field. This is going to be a 2-part thing we're going to do. And I'm going to save the bracket part, how I think the bracket is going to play out, for next week's pod. Okay? We went a little bit long-winded today. I realize I'm going to be with some of this stuff. And I think that's worthy of it, explaining kind of how these 12 teams can get there and then what it'll look like once they actually do. Is that fair?
Sounds like a plan.
Start with number 12, Will. Boise State. Wait a minute. What year is this? This is 2025? This is 2024 all over again? What sold me on Boise State, even without Ashton Genty, this team is 9th in the country in Bill Connolly's percentage of returning production. That's right. 9th in the country for a team that just lost one of the faces of college football. 4 returning starters on that offensive line. Maddox Madsen, one of the great quarterback names we have in this sport right now. coming back, obviously going to be in a more increased role in that offense. And they've got a second year back in Sire Gaines that is going to make college football fans go, wait a minute. I thought Genty was gone. I thought that dude was off to the NFL. What do you mean they got another one? He's not going to be Genty 2.0, but there are going to be a lot of moments this year in which we're looking up going, whoa, how did they reload at that position that well?
I'm sorry, they have a running back named what now?
Sire Gaines. Season-ending injury early last year in September as a true freshman. He had like a 100-yard game in their first game of the year and was looking really, really promising, and then he goes down. But there are people that think they're going to build an offense around him, and he's got Mountain West Player of the Year potential, and he could be an absolute star in this offense and not necessarily have a season for the ages a la Ashton Genty, but just at least give them an identity that doesn't have to change their offense that much.
Think about this. How many people has Boise State lost where we go, yeah, is the end of this thing, right? I mean, Chris Peterson was the guy who was never going to leave. Brian Harsin actually only had one fewer year than Peterson by the time it was all done, which is crazy. That was kind of the model of consistency there. But then they just kind of keep reloading. I mean, Kellen Moore is the head coach of the Saints, and they're still rocking and rolling. They made a 12-team playoff. This is the exact team that the expanded playoff can benefit. And they've been fighting for it for well over a decade at this point. So, yeah, I mean, who am I to foolishly assume that Sire Gaines, who just sounds like a lifting persona, or, I mean, again, the best name almost ever for a running back. So, yeah, I believe in Sire Gaines, and I believe in Boise State getting a 12.
Sounds like a college football 25 name, doesn't it?
Yep.
And it's a real name because the game actually exists now. But yeah, I just think this offense is going to put up a ton of points, even if it isn't a world beater defense. Eric Shenander leading that defense, always skeptical of him because he was the guy that Scott Frost brought over to Nebraska from UCF. And you're like, why did you do that? That didn't make a lot of sense. It was kind of his undoing, but we'll save that discussion for a different time. I think a lot of people are going to put some respect on Spencer Danielson's name this year. I think he's going to be one of those guys where if he's not a household name in this sport as one of the 10 to 15 best coaches, I think this year will truly establish that. And I'll take it a step further, Will. The only time that a group of 5 team went to the playoff in the 4-team era, Cincinnati, they won at Notre Dame in 2021. The first time that a group of 5 team will repeat as a playoff team in the 12-team era will be Boise State, who will win at Notre Dame in 2025. That's right. So we're calling the upset right now. There could still be a slip-up game there. Not saying they get to the college football playoff at 13-0. Maybe a Dowell Loggins-led App State team, a Dan Mullen-led UNLV team. Maybe they sneak up on Boise State or something like that, and they're able to go on the road, pull off an upset. But I think the Broncos win the Mountain West. I think they get a spot as the highest-ranked Group of 5 conference champ. Moving on. Louisville at 11. Yeah. Jeff Brom has, I think, unofficially taken Mark Stoops' spot as the ultimate floor raiser in college football. 2 programs now. 2 different programs that he's done this at. He has at least 8 regular season wins in each of his last 4 seasons, 2 of which were at Purdue. He's 24-10 in conference play over the last 4 years. That is unthinkable considering the situations that he was in, both the one that he inherited from Darrell Hazel at Purdue, which was a disaster, and the one that he inherited even at Louisville, where I think people were looking up going, man, this is going to take a few years. And he's like, no, we're going to do this year 1. And just like that.
In an era where like guys are running from that style of job, it's like the toughest battles meme. He's like, no, give me the Northwestern job. I'm going to take them to the playoff. And good for him. Like, I love that he's this in love with building in this sport.
Yeah, and building it as alma mater obviously means a lot more to him. But, think about the quarterbacks. Aiden O'Connell, Jack Plummer, your boy Tyler Shuck. As much as I would love to give my mom credit for developing Aiden O'Connell as his kindergarten gym teacher, so she deserves partial credit. Like, that's a true story. Jeff Brom developing those 3 guys into NFL quarterbacks. All 3 of those guys, 53-man roster guys, assuming Tyler Shuck makes the 53-man. Will, are we still thinking that's going to happen?
I don't know if I'm rooting for that or not, to be honest. But I guess I got to pretend to be. Yeah, let's do it.
Those guys were not on NFL radars. Go through a year with Jeff Brom, and that's just kind of what happens to you. But it's going to be an awfully tough look for Lincoln Riley when Jeff Brom turns Miller Moss into an NFL guy too. That's coming.
That's actually really funny, yeah, because, I mean, how often is he just giving up on a guy? Very rarely, actually.
Very, very rarely. Spencer Rattler? That's kind
But
of
we talked about though he had your guy behind him, right? So he was just like, we're moving from 1 5 star to
what do you
another.
mean, my guy? Will is
Oh
my
my gosh, look at that
yeah
Caleb Williams shirt.
yeah.
That is crazy. He's got the Stunner shades on. Let's go.
We're shout out Breaking Tea. We're repping Caleb Williams right now. What do you mean? Who are you talking about? But yeah, last year this Louisville team lost 4 games, all of which were by 1 score. They also destroyed Clemson on the road, a game that was much more lopsided than that 33-21 final suggested. And everyone thought that Clemson had turned the corner at that point. And that was kind of a humbling moment for that program. Their only loss in those final 6 games was a weird 14-point blown lead at Stanford. They were 14 in the final 6 minutes and then somehow lost that game on a last-second field goal. Just bizarre. This year, that duo of Moss, ACC Rookie of the Year, Isaac Brown, that's going to lead to a 10-win effort against, I think, a schedule that sets up really well. Only 4 road games for Louisville. They do have to travel to Miami, have to travel to SMU, plus a home game against Clemson. You can go 1-2 in those games and still probably make it to the ACC championship. I think they actually go 2-1 in those games. They make it to the ACC championship. They're kind of in that spot that SMU was in last year with people saying they shouldn't fall out of the playoff if they lose that game in the ACC championship. So I think Louisville's in at that 11 seed.
Yeah, this is another one where it's like we're just betting on guys, or you're just picking guys to continue to do what they've done, and I love that because Jeff Brom's done this. Like, I mean, they're again not going to get into like how the 12 team playoff would have worked in different years or whatever, but like he has had that style of team that has competed, that has looked respectable year in and year out. And to your point, yeah, that like every team like that kind of has a weird loss here and there, but they've shown. And the Jeff Brom coach teams have shown they could jump up and beat the big teams. And one of those here or there is enough to get a new 12-team playoff in that conference.
And Kentucky's no longer the boogeyman waiting for you at the end of the regular season.
Yep.
That's over. You worked through that last year in emphatic fashion. And so that's something that Jeff Brom, and if you're a Louisville believer, you can kind of, get past that, at least being a potential roadblock to the 12-team playoff. All right, Texas Tech is my 10 seed. Really tempted to put Arizona State here. Really tempted because I only have one Big 12 team coming up in the 12-team playoff this year. I think it's a really similar argument for Arizona State to the one that I just made for Boise State, where you would look at it and go, wait a minute, they lost a generational back, and wow, how are they going to get there? But the rest of the team is still very much intact, and that's so important for them. But I'm going to go with Texas Tech, the fighting Cody Campbells, as they should be known. Not the fighting Joey McGuire's, the fighting Cody Campbell's. Mm-hmm. I say there's a new term, a new phrase we need to embody. We need to at least acknowledge as it relates to this era of college football. They say with solving crimes, I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, follow the money.
Right.
I say with predicting playoff teams, follow the money. Texas Tech, lots and lots of money, thanks to one Cody Campbell. As a result, that's a team that's 4th in America in percentage of returning production, coming off a year in which they had the number 4 scoring offense. And I guess this, in a weird way, is kind of similar to the Arizona State, Boise State thing, because Taj Brooks, he's gone. USC transfer, Quentin Joyner, he's stepping into that role as a tailback. But I'm not even really overly concerned about whether or not he ends up being, this 1,200, 1,300 yard back for them. I just love that they shelled out so much cash in the trenches. Mm-hmm. Look at their incoming transfers. If you're not sipping the Texas Tech Kool-Aid, their top 6 guys that they got in the transfer portal are 4-star transfers who play either O-line or D-line. They're going to be old and experienced in the trenches. They overhauled that defense after it was a doormat last year. I mean, goodness gracious, Arkansas got every blade of grass it wanted in that bowl game. And they had some opt-outs and stuff like that as well. But it was a bad defense that was made to look like a Pop Warner defense in that bowl game. They had the biggest split in America in terms of scoring offense and scoring defense. Will, I'd have to go. I should have looked this up. And in my downtime, maybe I will. I don't know that I've ever seen a gap as big as 4th scoring defense in America and 122nd scoring defense in America.
Wait, which one's offense or which one's defense?
Fourth in scoring, my bad. I probably messed that up. 4th in scoring, 122nd in defense. Mike Leach would be proud.
Well, man, we've already talked about Brian Kelly losing to Cincinnati. We've talked about Tyler Shuck. Let's hit the triple and go for Matt House, because I'm sure that team was pretty close.
Will, look it up. Look it up right now. Look up 23 LSU. and tell me what they were scoring offense compared to scoring defense, because that's the more recent example that's going to come to mind. But I don't even think they were 122nd in scoring defense.
Oh my gosh. First and 82nd. That's actually not even.
See,
That's not the zip code. That's hilarious. Okay,
100,
good.
118
Good take.
spots. 118 spots. That's hard to do, man. That is really hard to do.
Okay, I'm sorry, Matt House. Today I owe you an apology. Never again.
I'm just saying, because like at least you get some of those games in non-conference play where you can kind of beef up some of the numbers a little bit, and you hold a group of 5 team to 14 points or something like that. It brings the totals down. No. Texas Tech was just saying we have one style, and that's all gas, no brakes. We're just going to try and win every game as a shootout, which feels very fitting for that team. I think that turns around at least somewhat this year. They are number 1 in America in percentage of returning defensive production. A lot of that is because of the portal additions. It's a little bit weird, the formula, the way that Bill Connolly does that. But something to keep in mind. And for those who don't know the name, Baron Morton comes back as that starting quarterback off of a shoulder injury. I think he puts together an all Big 12 season for a team that is very much dead set on making a playoff push in 2025. I think that team has embodied everything NIL related that you would talk about. Of what does it look like to make that jump from like 7-8 win team to saying, no, we're going to win 9-10 games. We're going to be there. We want to get to a college football playoff. This is what it looks like. I think Arizona State, Kansas State are just on the outside looking in as 3 lost teams. But yeah, I was so close to pulling the trigger on Arizona State, and then I deleted it because I just closed my eyes. I pictured some 5 interception game from Sam Levitt, and I thought, nah, that better not go with that this year. So that Texas Tech is my 10 seed.
Yeah, this is a team that I've just been fascinated with for years, and the way they've kind of done roster management. And they're like one of these sleeper portal teams. Like their Matador NIL Club collective is like basically put all these feelers or like press stuff that's just like, we're coming, like watch out. They, to your point, spent a ton of money. And they got up to like $10 million, what it says here, which who's to say what the NIL stuff is like, who's to say what's real?
They're spending. Like
They're
no matter,
spending
they're
like
definitely
heck,
spending money. Yeah.
They're spending. And so like, that's the thing, like in the era of NIL, maybe there will be a year or two, like kind of like what Miami did or what A&M did, where these teams will take off and then the boosters will go, what are we paying for here? It might just go in waves like that, right? Like there's going to be your Oregons, there's going to be your Ohio States, there's going to be your Texas, but like here and there are going to be these teams that if they can capitalize on a big spend, they can go back to those same donors and be like, hey, actually this worked out. Like we got you some cool club seats and playoff games. Let's try this again. And so Texas Tech, kind of like where they're standing in their conference and everything, it could be wide open because that's just kind of how the Big 12 works now. It's just like if you have a good season, we saw what Colorado did with like 4 good players just running through the Big 12, winning some big games, obviously not winning the conference, but making a splash and turning things around. So I think that a place like Texas Tech, they've shown commitment to football over the years. They've shown a commitment to adapt or die. And I mean, they might be getting their money's worth this year. Yeah, I feel it.
They might just have Cody Campbell forever working to fund ridiculously expensive rosters.
Mm-hmm.
And they might not even need to go through those ebbs and flows of trying to talk this booster into that and whatnot. No. Just sign the check. Let's be competitive. Let's go win a bunch of football games in a conference that's really wide open. That's kind of a fun byproduct of this era, is that you can see a team like that just pops up. And maybe this next team is an example of that as well. 9 seed, Illinois. Shout out Bert, man. Shout out Bert.
I love him so much.
Dude, I called Bert a can of tuna in the back of the pantry. I think it's 6 years ago. 6 years ago. I think that take was 2019. Front of the pantry. I'm not saying that he's as reliable as the Gunnar Helm little jar of peanut butter that's sitting right there, but he's certainly built a program that feels so Bert and so Wisconsin-esque. I was trying to say. And I think this is a legitimate playoff team going into the season, and it doesn't feel like a dark horse. Slightly concerned that we needed Luke Altmaier to announce that he was staying with the team post-spring and that he wasn't going to Tennessee. Not great that your QB1 is like, I'm running it back. Buddy, it's April. I hope you're running it back. If you're not, we have real problems on our hands. Not the best vibe. Would have also felt a little bit better if Josh McCray had stayed instead of transferring to Georgia. That makes me feel a little bit better about Georgia's backfield situation. But nonetheless, I trust a Brett Bielema backfield. I just do.
Yeah.
I still have my Luke Altmaier stock. My ability to buy stock in former SEC quarterbacks that transfer outside the conference. I'm not saying I'm going to open up a law firm, but it could fund retirement. I think Haynes King, Connor Wigman. I bought more stock in. Is that bad? Maybe. It was
Haynes
so
King is
low.
like that's like a CD. That's like buying gold. Okay, you could have bought Haynes King. It's like Zach Calzada. You could have bought that 10 years ago and it'd still be paying dividends.
No problem with it whatsoever. But I think you combine a very experienced offense with a solid defense that ranks 8th in percentage of returning production on that side of the ball. I think Illinois wins 10 games again, and they won 10 games with the bowl victory against South Carolina, a game in which, look, I think South Carolina had some definitely some tough opt-outs. And I don't want to say that it was a full-strength South Carolina team. Still a really impressive game by Illinois. Still a very impressive game against the South Carolina team that looked like it could beat anyone in the country. It's a tough schedule, but the good news, no Oregon, no Penn State, no Michigan. And the Ohio State game is at home. You need probably a minimum 4-1 coming out of September with games at Duke, at Indiana, home against USC. So tricky to start off, but that's what you would hope an experienced team can handle. If Illinois starts off 5-0, I'm going to feel that much better about 10-2.
I remember going into last year, and I think I took them at the very end of the America's Team draft, and I was like,
You did.
this
Yep.
is going to be a fun team. I was like, I can't really explain it. It's Luke Altmaier, and I just know Bert's going to have something up his sleeve. And this is a team, and you reminded me when we talked about it then, they were #1 in scoring defense in 2022. Now, they couldn't figure out anything about offense, but last year they really, I feel like, put it together. They were just like 31st in scoring defense. And one thing about a Bert coach football team is they are terrible to play, right? They are just not fun to play. We saw that in the, was it 9 overtime game they had against Penn State that kind of like set the tone. And you look at that South Carolina bowl win, and it's like, man, this is a Bert masterclass. He's getting under Shane Beamer's skin. He's offering to fight him. Every person is trying to draw up. It was the original, 100 people versus a gorilla. It was like one Brett Bielema versus a younger Shane Beamer, and like that's exactly the persona that this team can like find to be successful, basically, especially in the modern Big Ten where you have to have an identity. And to your point, I actually kind of think it's good that like a guy like Altmaier is saying like, hey, I'm here, I'm bought in, because there are going to be so many questions, and in these kind of like, no offense, second tier programs, like as soon as something happens, like the Nico drama, it's like, well, who could we rob? Nobody really wants to stay anywhere. It's cool that they're building a culture that guys want to buy back into, because Altmaier, I'm sure, would have a huge market. And so that being said, I defense is a little bit more recession proof. Yeah, they weren't great in 23 on that side of the ball, but it's not like one player goes down and it changes everything. So yeah, I love this. This is kind of like a modern version of Iowa, where they can kind of, you watch them and you're like, what is going on with this team? And then you kind of look at the aggregate and you're like, they're giving everybody hell, man.
Well, I watched that game. It was a Friday night, and Illinois was playing at Nebraska. Tim Brando was on the call pronouncing Dylan Raiola's name wrong every single time. Dylan Raiola was running for his life. And I had this moment watching this game as I watched Illinois' edge rushers just send Dylan Raiola 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage and throw it to absolutely no one. I thought to myself, why did I doubt Brett Bielema? Why? Why did I have this hard and fast rule of you can't hire Brett Bielema after the way that things shook out at Arkansas? That was a dumb take. In hindsight, just a dumb take, and I regret it, and I think his team's going to be awesome this year.
Yeah.
All right. Bama's at number 8. A 10-win regular season, I think, should be the expectation. Anything more, really solid. Anything less, I will be joining the Kalen DeBoer skeptics. But it's become a no-excuses offense. It became a no-excuses offense the day that Ryan Grubb signed on the dotted line to reunite with Kalen DeBoer, period. That's not to say I don't have questions about the offensive line. I'm not convinced that Ty Simpson plays at an all-SEC level, even though he should have one of the best receiving rooms in America, especially if Isaiah Horton can kind of be that 2022 Brew McCoy type presence in that offense. I think you see a defense that, while it lacked consistency in the first part of last year, I think it was really only responsible for one of those 4 losses. I think you could look back at all 3 of those other losses, Michigan, I think Oklahoma, you could definitely make the case for. And yeah, I mean, look, I think Demon Tennessee, they pitched a shutout the first half of that game. I definitely think the defense did its part in that one. I think you can make the case that the offense was to blame for 3 of those 4 losses. And while I do think the defense might be getting a touch too much love, it still has dudes at every level. Lawson has to be healthy coming off the ACL, but you kind of pair that with some of the guys they have in the front seven with Overton, with Keenan, and then the secondary I think should be improved with Damani Jackson, Keon Sabb coming over, plus the Cam Calhoun addition from Utah. There's just no reason why this group can't repeat as the top 10 scoring unit in the sport. So I think Bama could lose to both Georgia and LSU, yet it can get in the Tennessee way. 10-2 team, don't make the SEC championship, but unlike Tennessee, Bama won't have to travel to the Midwest for sub-freezing temperatures against the eventual national champs in a first-round game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, hey, they had the Wisconsin game last year, so you can't even take that away from them. They will go play the North, right?
The game was 72 degrees, I think.
That was, yeah, you were there in the stands with a beer, actually. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I wish, man. That looked like a beautiful, beautiful fall day in Madison. Oh, yeah. Ideal football weather that day.
Facts. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, right? We talked about this kind of last year. So when you bring back the guys that Alabama did, on the surface, I can't believe this sounds like so much copium or hopium, but it's true, right? Like when you bring back the leadership that they did, they were still the ghost of that Saban team there, right? The guys that committed to Nick Saban, who is and always has been fundamentally an adapt or die style defensive coach, right? So he's not like he's not like DeBoer in the sense that he caters to the flashy offenses. He does that type of stuff. Like if you're a defensive player that committed to Nick Saban, you are part of a dynasty. You are part of one of the most respectable things in the history of college football. And switching to the leadership they had on that side of the ball last year, to he who should not be named, I think that there was a little bit of a translation.
We can name Kane Womack. He put up a top 10 defense. He had their best scoring defense since 2017 when they were number one in the country.
Yes, and he was also getting screamed at by his players, and those players are now gone. And so that's more of my point, is that their players that were screaming at you aren't here anymore. And so therefore, it's going to be a lot harder to have like a mutiny on your side of the ball. So I think that kind of the offense was a little bit shocking. I think maybe we did learn a little bit about Jalen Milroe, but at the same time, and I've said this over and over again, and I'm not going to change it now, I do think Ryan Grubb matters a ton. Yep. I think that, sitting here saying a 10-win regular season is the expectation, I mean, that's Alabama football. You know what I'm saying? I think that under Saban it was 11, 12, and thankfully to them, genuinely, this timing happened at the perfect time where it's like if you're going to do a little bit of a rebuild after the greatest coach ever, a 12-team playoff will help you a lot, because you're not having to get to that top four. You're not having to be in the BCS and play mistake-free. You can kind of change some things on the fly. Even if if your quarterback doesn't work, you can change that midseason. If you need to change your scheme and simplify things, you can suffer a loss or two or be knocking on the door 3. We saw like last year, there were some 3-1 teams that were pretty close last year and some things didn't break their way. But point being, I think that last year was kind of a let's see what we have year at Alabama. This year is the true quote unquote rebuild year, right? And I think that as long as they can stay kind of between the buoys there, it's kind of an easier path to this style playoff, which really gives you a bump going into the next season. So I'm actually excited is the word, but I'm not looking forward either. I'm interested by I'm intrigued by what the offense is going to be. I think it's going to be a really good offense this year too.
We're just finishing Ted Lasso right now. End of season 3. No spoilers, please. I know we were late to the party on that one. Hadn't had Apple TV until we got new phones. So yeah, just one of those streaming services that we just didn't have.
Unless you're watching Ted Lasso, it makes zero sense to have Apple TV, honestly.
Fair. Severance, I know people are very, very much into as well. And this is going to sound disrespectful to Kalen DeBoer, and I don't intend it for it to be that way because I know he's been a play caller in the past, and I know that he's had a lot of success there. Ryan Grubb is to Kalen DeBoer as Beard is to Ted Lasso.
Yep.
Some similar vibes there. And I think last year, DeBoer missed his beard at times. I mean, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
I think there were moments in which you needed someone in that room offensively that could troubleshoot and could actually be afraid to have hard coaching. I think this year's team will benefit from that. And even if it's not perfect, I think that goes a long way. And I know people are probably sick of hearing us talk about Ryan Grubb and that impact. But there is a reason why these two guys have been so lockstep with one another. And I do think that makes all the difference. I think it gets them over the hump and maybe gets them out of one or two of these games where you're like, are they about to lose? Is this about to be another Vandy, Oklahoma type loss? And they're able to just kind of work through it. And I think that'll be the difference with this year's team. Number 7. Stay in the SEC. Let's go with Texas. if you listen to the show, you know I'm high on Texas. I have Texas starting off as my number one team in the country. So you might be wondering, where is the divide coming from? Where is that 7 seed? How is that shaken out? 10-2 losses at Ohio State, at Georgia. That's brutal, man. People, we're going to talk a lot about Texas's schedule, what a favorable draw they got first 2 years in the SEC. They still have to go to Ohio State and to Georgia. So
And
good
they
luck
had
with that.
Michigan last year, and it's not like they chose for Michigan to be sorry after they were dominant the year before.
Yeah, exactly. But I think with one loss in conference play,
They weren't that sorry, speaking of our last team. Anyway.
they were in the beginning of the year when they couldn't throw a forward pass, and even when they ended the year when they couldn't throw a forward pass. But they did still show some things, obviously, that made you think Michigan was a bit better than what they were in September. But I think Texas finishes the regular season with one loss in conference play. Georgia has the head-to-head to get to the SEC championship. I've talked ad nauseum about my love for this Texas defense with PK. I love it as much as any returning unit in college football. Even if Malik Muhammad isn't Jahdae Barron 2.0, I think it should still be just a better pass rush up front. Kobe Black, that's a name to watch in that secondary as well. A lot of people high on him in Austin. I don't think Arch lights the world on fire every game, and I don't necessarily think he has to. He could struggle against teams that have an elite pass rush. A lot of people will make a big deal of Texas having that turnover on the offensive line, 4 or 5 new starters with that group. It's one of the best offensive line coaches in all of college football, and Kyle Flood. I'm going to trust that long term. Watch that season opener against Ohio State, and even though it's Larry Johnson that runs that defensive line, they're going to have a million camera shots on Matt Patricia with that stupid pencil in his ear, just giddy with this Ohio State defense. Get ready for that. That's coming. I don't know if he's going to be in the booth. He seems like a booth guy to me at the college level, not a sideline guy. I don't know.
If they'll let him on the sideline, I think he'll be on the sideline. So sweaty, throwing stuff like that is a I hate to say a me first guy, but he should teach a PR class. All right, like that's a guy who hasn't. I mean, he was the defensive coordinator for the. I mean, I put that in quotes because it's a Belichick team, but even with Belichick, he gave up the most yards in Super Bowl history to the Eagles, and probably got a head coaching job. And so, yeah, watching that guy, I think he's a little bit too loves the camera a little bit too much to be stuck in the booth.
He got to be an offensive play caller as a defensive-minded guy. I need to know who's doing work. Is Ryan Bamford his agent?
Right.
Is UMass AD Ryan Bamford doing work on this? I'm just saying the Northeast connection would make a lot of sense. Just throwing it out there. But I think we're going to see Texas lose that game. That's my guess. People will hop off the Texas bandwagon. They'll say Arch is overrated. I will hop on. I will buy all the stock that you want to sell. That's perfectly fine with me. I just think Texas is going to have too high of a floor, deep backfield, Wisner coming back, Baxter if he's able to be healthy, Gibson as well. They could just have some of these games like last year where it's 24-10 and you're not setting the world on fire. You're not necessarily rewriting the record books, but you just keep chugging along with that schedule. That schedule is begging for 10 wins, especially when you remember Steve Sarkisian has won 26 consecutive games against teams outside the top 15 of the AP poll. It's pretty good. That is pretty good. That's what we praise Saban for more than a decade, to go the entire 2010s without losing a game like that, which, yeah, South Carolina was inside the top 15, I want to say. Yeah. The only such loss that Texas has had post year one to a team outside of the top 15, Texas Tech. September of year 2, Texas was without Quinn Ewers after he took that hit against Bama. It was a Hudson Card game. People threw the horns down in Bijan's face. I remember it was a whole deal. Texas gets to the playoff at 10-2.
Yeah, it's almost ironic. And I know people say the word ironic too often, right? But it kind of is when it comes to Sark being, again, like the bastion of consistency. Like, this is a coach that made 2 different conference championships in back-to-back years. And, being the guy who was a little bit all over the place, being the guy who had bounced around, is he damaged goods or whatever. And again, I know I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again, especially as we get into the season and, like the listens pick up and we start doing more pods, as far as how much of an abject disaster last year should have been for Texas. How much of it should have been in the way, and earmuffs here, we did a lot of Oklahoma service this week, but the way that Oklahoma season went, Texas' season could have gone just as bad, if not worse, when you think about the injuries, when you think about the quarterbacks they had in there. And I think that, to your point, credit to PK, I think the defense takes a step back this year because they were all world last year, except for against Georgia, obviously. But point being, I think that the offense, it's hard for me to imagine it not getting better. I know they lost some talent, but like Isaiah Bond's like another one of those guys where it's like, what do we really have here? Missing Gunnar Helm is going to hurt, but that's not the connection. Like, it's not like they have the reps in the way that Helm and Ewers did. So again, like Ewers was just so injured last year, and the official report finally came out where he talked about how injured
Torn
he was.
oblique. Yeah.
Yeah, and like that's bad, man. Like, and I know he had arm strength concerns coming into the year, and we talked about that. It's tough that he couldn't show more because he was injured. And as like a Friday night light style football guy, you want to get out there and just put the not complain and there's a lot to be said about that. But at the same time, their offense was just so limited, and Sark was just out there making like gourmet food with a completely bare coverage. So I think that we could assume the defense takes a step back because they were so good last year. But I think just knowing what you have on offense, knowing that the quarterback is not injured and that there's not this quarterback with a big name that like our moms know who he is, like that stuff is so bad. And especially Sark this early in his kind of Texas career, but with all the baggage he has from his previous stops, it's not like Nick Saban having, the couple of quarterbacks he had to deal with towards the end of his career. Like, remember the I'm not going to, so quit asking quote with Saban? Like, even Saban managing two quarterbacks like that, it was hard to do because guys, you can only play one of them, right? And they found a way to integrate Arch last year, but there's no questions this year. We had a segment last week about Arch will probably be back an additional season. And so unless he balls out, which I obviously think would behoove everyone, if he has 40 touchdowns, maybe he goes. But point, you know what I'm saying? Point being, like, unless it's like a perfect, like, nothing to do here, undefeated championship right out of the sun, like, our stock can only go down. But point being, like, I think they at least know, losing Baxter to start the year, having to put everything together, only Banks being healthy and him kind of struggling in the Georgia games. They just didn't know what they had on a week-to-week basis. And I think, hey, you go to Ohio State and you lose, it's like, that's Ohio State. Cool,
It's a good point. And, people might say, what do you mean that it could have been a disaster last year? Some of the timing of those injuries, the guy that they expected to be their starting running back, and they lost they had a true freshman that went down with a season-ending injury as well in fall camp. So they lost two of their, I believe, 4 scholarship backs in fall camp. And then they had the 2 injuries on the offensive line late in the season to Banks and to Cam Williams. You had the multi-game Quinn Ewers injury. Isaiah Bond was not healthy down the stretch. And you kind of look up and you're like, well, yeah, Texas just keeps winning games. Texas has gone from the team that everybody jokingly would thrust into the national spotlight prematurely to being the team that's now become boring for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And that's a testament
that's
to good
the
coaching.
Word, dog.
Yeah.
That's the word. They're getting boring, and we like that here.
Yeah. All right, number 6, Ohio State. Team that will play Texas in that season opener. I have a ton of teams going 10-2, and the defending champs, they are in that club. I think they're going to miss out on playing for a conference title and not care at all. Why would you? Really, why would you? 10-2 worked out just fine for you last year. Didn't need to go to a Big Ten championship. This year, losses that bookend Big Ten play for Ohio State. Loss at Washington, loss at Michigan. That's right. They lose to Michigan yet again. And people are like, wow, what do we think of Ryan Day? He's just never going to beat Michigan, but he's got that title. The last one, we've talked about this before, the last Washington coach to lose at Husky Stadium was Jimmy Lake in 2021.
That's
Think
so
about
funny,
that.
man. That's so funny.
Isn't that crazy? Road teams are 0-20 in their last 20 games there.
Nobody comes to Seattle and survives.
Literally
We'll
nobody.
throw fish at you.
Nobody. And they face good teams up there. They face Dan Lanning, Oregon teams that everybody has been penciling in for a national championship. And, man, they just are a really tough team to beat in that part of the country. They have been lights out. And Jed Fish having that perfect home record in year one is kind of one of those things that makes you go, wow, that's a testament to that venue. But first true road game that's going to be for Julian Sayin. I think that's going to be a problem. Brian Hartline gets humbled as a first-time play caller. There'll be some fun late season debate about whether a 9-3 Michigan team is more worthy of making the playoff than 10-2 Ohio State, because Michigan, in my scenario, has the head-to-head. But Ohio State ultimately gets in. They're going to have that Texas win in their back pocket. I think they're going to beat Penn State yet again. They're going to get the nod as the defending champs. It's going to be a grind at times, I think, this year, despite the fact that they have probably the 2 best returning players in all of college football. Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith. You might have heard of those guys. Might have to have some late game heroics at Illinois or something like that. But I think having Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate in that receiver room, that's going to be unfair. A young front seven eventually figures it out. Ohio State gets into the playoff again.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it a lot, but this playoff format really benefits these bigger teams. We saw the exact test. I mean, last year it was like a parody of everything I thought about what would happen with the 12 team because the favorites, I think, still went undefeated through the entire playoff. And that was true through like the quarterfinal. And I need to go back and look that up. I think that held true considering, who won. But point being, like, I will see, because the thing about Ohio State is they should win every year. Like, I'm not taking anything away from them, but they have this talent every year. Last year they were able to do it. It would make just as much sense to have a step back as for them to just start a dynasty right here. Honestly. So I think that Texas game is going to matter a ton. I think they will have a weird loss like Washington, but I love that shout out because it really wouldn't be that weird if you consider where these two teams are. So yeah, I think we could probably pencil in Ohio State for the foreseeable future in 12 team.
Yeah, it is crazy that they lost that much talent and they're still returning 2 stars like that. Now, be a little bit skeptical of that because 2022 Bama is the comp that I would make, wherein that team had Will Anderson on the defensive side of the ball, Bryce Young coming off a Heisman Trophy season. We're like, they've got the best offensive player, they've got the best defensive player. Why aren't they better? And they were obvious preseason number one, knowing that, and then you kind of realize, well, they have shortcomings, and it's not basketball. Like you have to have strengths in other spots, and if you have weaknesses like play caller that's coming up short, an offensive line that's not particularly good, you could be beat, and that Bama team was. All right, number 5, Clemson. This is exactly what I mentioned earlier, Will. Clemson could go 12-1, win the ACC, and still not be considered a top 4 team, which would mean missing out on a bye if indeed the format changes with just straight seeding and we're not doing the 4 highest ranked conference champs or the ones that get the byes. Clemson could, in this scenario, actually be like, oh, crap. Maybe we should have stayed at the original format of the 12-team playoff. But what would hurt Clemson then? Because I bet you're wondering, 12-1, ACC champ? What are we talking about here? How would that team not get a top 4 seed? Clemson loses the opener to LSU. I might eat those words. Even though Clemson ends up winning 12 in a row after ripping through the ACC, it gets burned by the LSU loss and doesn't necessarily get that first round bye that it believes it deserves. It has to play a first round game. It should still be a favorable matchup, but not necessarily something that Clemson would want to do.
You know what I'm excited about? The potential to go 0-6 picking LSU's first game. Because if you think about it, since I've been on this podcast, they lost to UCLA, they lost to Mississippi State, they lost to FSU twice, and USC. And by the time those games roll around, every single time I was like, they'll find a way. They'll find a way. Even the years I was like, I think they'll lose. We talked about it, and a couple of them you convinced me. This year, I'm picking Clemson. And then that way, if LSU wins, I'll just be 0-6. Easy work.
That makes one of us. Not the last mention of your Bayou Bengals. Spoiler alert.
Oh, heck yeah. How about that?
Yeah, we're going to get there. We're going to talk about this more in depth with David Hale. Clemson finally has the pieces in place that's really been lacking throughout the 2020s. The coaching staff additions are a huge, huge part of that. The Tom Allen addition was everything for a defense that was really a shell of its former self, and the passing game being elite, finally having those dudes at receiver is going to be a big part of this. I know the ground game struggled last year in Matt Luke's first year on that staff. I think that works out better long-term. He's too good of an offensive line coach for them to be as much of a liability as they were running the football last year, where once Phil Maffa was banged up, it was kind of like, well, they're just not going to run the football, and they're not going to be able to do anything. I think that changes this year. They've done some things to address those areas. So Clemson going to be a very chalky pick to win the ACC. Understandably so, but I'm on board with them getting back to the playoff and feeling like they at least have some sort of contender mojo.
Yeah, shout out to Dabo for neither adapting nor dying. I think he's found the third.
Dabo has adapted. I'm going to give him some credit for this. I'm going to give Dabo some credit right now because it's not just the fact that he's gotten, 3 portal additions? 3, I think we're at.
Texas Tech had that on the line.
No, the coaching staff stuff. It used to be he treated this like it was Northwestern.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, you're not Larry Fitzgerald. You're competing for, in a lot of ways, you're trying to compete for national championships, man. You can't just be running it back with
Larry Fitzgerald's a wide receiver.
Oh, golly.
I was like, what is Larry Fitzgerald?
No. Pat Fitzgerald. Golly. Chicago brain. It just slipped my mind on that one. My bad. Freudian slip. Clemson approaching it like this is some in-house mafia sort of deal with its coaching staff never made any sense. It didn't. And finally, Dabo realized if we want to compete, we can still do it the Clemson way, but we have this money and we should probably spend it on elite coaches. And sure enough, that's exactly what they've done. So I think that deserves mention. That deserves mention in the adapt column and not so much in the die column.
Yeah, fair. And if it's working for him, I mean, it would be very funny to your point if they change the format and they end up getting left out. Dabo's more furious than ever because he
Right?
actually does have a great team. But anyway.
Yeah. All right. Penn State at 4. I actually have a repeat of the Big Ten championship. Maybe that's a little bit boring. I have Penn State starting 11-1 with a regular season win against Oregon. Oregon has to come to Happy Valley. But then it's Oregon who wins the rematch in the Big Ten title game. I'm not a big Drew Aller guy. I think we've talked about that ad nauseum. I am, however, a believer in that backfield with Singleton and Allen. If you're not a believer in that, you just maybe don't watch football. Luke Reynolds, he's not going to be Tyler Warren 2.0, but he's going to be a star in Andy Kotelnicki's offense. There's a lot of potential there. There are people that are very, very high on the young tight end. And defensively, not sure that they're going to replace Abdul Carter. Not sure that they've got necessarily the horses to be able to do that just yet, but replacing some of those guys is going to be much easier when you just replaced Tom Allen with Jim Knowles. That's basically like when Ryan Reynolds replaced Scarlett Johansson with Blake Lively. You're just like, what? How's that fair? You shouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
Circled around. Originally was going to go J-Lo replacing A-Rod with Ben Affleck. And then I thought a lot of people are kind of out on Ben Affleck as being this heartthrob guy. Thought that comp was a little bit more justified. I'm going to give James Franklin some credit here, much like I just gave Dabo credit for realizing he needs to spend big on assistants. James Franklin understands that he needs to go big for his assistants. His best teams have all done that. As tempting as it is to say that this is finally going to be the year that Penn State beats Ohio State, that game is in Columbus. I would just feel like an absolute moron the second that Drew Aller throws a late pick into the waiting arms of one Caleb Downs and Penn State loses yet again. And we're like, wow, when's James Franklin ever going to win this game? But Penn State, even with that, back into the playoff, back into the Big Ten championship, maybe a better team than last year, but I'm going to not necessarily go that far just yet.
Yeah, I've had this rule for years when I talk about the NFL, and I just don't talk about the Dallas Cowboys because they're just not that interesting to me because they do the same thing every year. And I'm kind of getting there with Penn State where like, we can get some time back here. If they do the exact same thing they did last year, that would be so par for the course. And again, they're going to need to throw the football downfield if they choose to do that. If James Franklin sits in a meeting and goes, let's take some deep shots, maybe they'll make a run, but I don't think it's going to happen. So that's all I got on them.
Will, that makes my skin crawl.
What?
That's what James Franklin said in that press conference.
Oh, he sure did.
Yeah.
Like you're speaking Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay.
God. Sorry, you got my skin crawling thinking about all the things that annoy me about James Franklin. Let's move on. I have Georgia at 3. 8 consecutive years of top 7 finishes for one Kirby Smart. Last time Kirby had 3 regular season losses was year 1. So predict that Georgia will go 9-3 is saying that they would have their worst year since year 1, and I'm not willing to do that. After consecutive disappointing seasons, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the story of this Georgia team. Not sure that Gunnar Stockton turns into Stetson Bennett V, but I do think he's going to get a ton of help from an improved receiver room. It's a really nice 1-2 punch in the backfield with Frazier, McCray coming over from Illinois in that post-spring window. Pretty telling that Georgia made a move like that post-spring. I know they've had some movement in the portal at running back, but that was a big-time splashy addition where I can guarantee you he had other suitors as well. And for Georgia to say, hey, we need a guy like that to add to our offense, pretty telling, I think. That has just not typically been their MO, but I just think that getting that backfield depth is more of the Kirby way than just trusting someone like Frazier to be 20, 25 carries, something like that. Also the Kirby way. Taking a defense that lacks household names nationally and turning them into household names nationally by season's end, that feels like something that'll happen. Secondary is going to be better. I just can't imagine that the run defense is going to be as bad as it was last year, as inconsistent as it was last year. CJ Allen taking that next step is going to be a big part of that. But this is the type of preamble that Kirby would prefer. I don't think he would prefer to be the number 1 team in college football. I think all coaches would rather be extremely talented and, as Kirby maybe did, tell them, hey, everybody thinks you're going 7-5. This should be a hungry team with a lot to prove. Not a whole lot of holdovers from those championship teams. So maybe the lack of entitlement benefits Georgia. Schedule's still tough. You got Tennessee, you got Bama, Florida, Texas. But, and here's an interesting caveat with this Georgia schedule. After that week 3 game at Tennessee, which that's a weird sentence to say out loud. After that week 3 game at Tennessee, only 2 true road games for Georgia. And they're at Auburn and at Mississippi State, neither of whom made a bowl game last year. I have Georgia getting to the SEC championship for the 8th time in the last 9 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I started this early part of last year, 2024, being like, man, I am just not happy about Carson Beck and Mike Bobo. And I think at least one of those guys we've gotten around to agree on now that Carson Beck has left for Miami. I think last year was about as interesting as Kirby Smart would ever want a season to be. Obviously, they had like the off the field stuff. They had like the ongoing Carson Beck saga where he was like acting like he was playing on freshmen in NCAA and just like chucking the ball to anybody out there. I think that's so outside of what Kirby Smart wants to do. And such a specific set of circumstances had to happen for the offense to look the way it did last year, wherein none of the receivers panned out, nobody developed. Carson Beck kind of had to play hero ball, but he was also like your leader, like your quarterback that you brought to media days. So you couldn't like really bench him or discipline him because then it's like, what are we doing here? And then he gets hurt. And it's like, what are we doing here? And so I think Georgia would like to get back to boring. Like we just used, boring as a good word for Texas. I think that would be so perfect for them to not be in like kind of these weird dogfight games where you're just like, what is Georgia? Like, were they just bored? And I think that getting back to kind of their like smash mouth DNA to great line play, something like on the offensive line, they just weren't awesome last year. Not something a ton of people talk about. But point being, I think that talk about, the running back edition, talking about the receiver additions, Kirby has proven like he's not like an old, he's a younger guy than most people would think too, just generally, right? But like he's not like a set in his ways coach, a la people imagine. Saban wasn't like this. I'm not going to say it's part of the Saban tree, but the way that we joke about Dabo and everything, or James Franklin, he has hit the portal for big acquisitions. ETN, the receivers just didn't really pan out. That's the thing, but he tried, and so same deal here. With the branches and everything. Like I think he will. If you hit on 50% of your transfers and your quarterback doesn't turn into a spy, I think Georgia has a very kind of ho-hum season. But again, what was the end result for Georgia? SEC championship, smoked Texas twice when it counted. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, if that's your floor and everything just goes wrong in the most bonkers way ever, and Kirby's hair is like going gray in front of our eyes because he can't figure out what's going wrong because it's all so weird, I think you're in a great place as a program. I think it's exactly where they are right now. This is about what we can expect every single year from Georgia.
If this is a vintage Georgia year and they win their 3rd title in 5 years, it's not going to surprise me.
Yeah.
I'm not at that place yet where I'm ready to dismiss them from the national conversation, despite the fact that I do have a lot of these questions. I think it's fair to have a lot of these questions. When you see the issues that they had last year where even UMass is racking up big chunks of yards against them. And that's a little bit of a Ryan Bamford thing, so I guess we kind of excuse that. But nonetheless, it is a different sort of preseason vibe that might be an easier sell to that program. Given all the successes they've experienced in the 2020s, and could it be exactly what Georgia needs? Number 2 seed, former Kirby Smart disciple, Oregon. Good old Dan Lanning. Oregon does not rank in the top 100 in percentage of returning production on the offensive side of the ball or the defensive side of the ball, because when you lose 10 players in the NFL draft, that type of thing happens. But when you have a coach like Dan Lanning and you retain your staff the way that Dan Lanning has with his top assistants, Will Stein, Tosh Lapoy, like you're now stacking these top 4 recruiting classes, you deserve some blind faith. You really do. Lanning's only losses the last 2 seasons were to teams that played in the national championship. 4 of his 6 losses as a coach were teams that played in a national championship. Ducks will reload. Dante Moore followed a very unique path, I think. Very unique progression as a 5-star quarterback who got playing time as a true freshman at UCLA, and then basically was willing to hit the reset button at Oregon and take that red shirt, learn behind Dylan Gabriel, learn behind Will Stein and kind of master that offense. And now there are expectations that he can be the next great Oregon quarterback after consecutive years of Oregon having one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I think that's going to pay dividends in an offense that's still going to have some studs. Evan Stewart coming back, guy that it feels like we've been talking about for a really, really long time, the former A&M transfer. They got the number 2 player in the portal, who in my opinion should be the number 1 player in the portal, because Nico is currently the number 1 player in the portal. Isaiah World is going to be their left tackle coming over from Nevada, a guy that it feels like a set it and forget it blindside protector, which is ideal to have in an offense like that. I'm in on Oregon until they actually give me a reason to believe that the talent well and the development has just dried up, and I don't think it has. I think they're going to lose at Penn State in that regular season game, but then win out, avenge that lone loss by beating Penn State in the Big Ten championship.
This team is so interesting, right? Because, when you talk about the returning players, it's almost like for Oregon, it's like, okay, who cares? Like that's like the one team that I'm like, they're almost getting to be like like the Lakers or something, where it's like dudes just end up in Oregon. Like it almost doesn't, they don't really even need to develop their own guys. Yeah, they recruit really well. And I'm not saying they don't, they get a ton of 5-stars, but like if you look up and down their classes, it's not like they get a ton of the depth guys because they end up just like rotating in guys. This gentleman, Isaiah World, which is an all-time offensive line name. Yeah, that's crazy. That's, second coolest name of this pod, but that's hard to beat, right? And so point being, like, I need to see, we collectively, I'm not breaking any news here, need to see them truly get over the hump, because that's the part that I feel like can be a little bit omitted, because you're right. They're losing to great teams, but they are and should be a great team. At some point, we'd like to see, one of these performances like Jeff Brom has, as a coach, where you just go play a great team and you just smoke them. And it's like, okay, we're the best team on the field today. We have the talent and we're putting it together and we don't need help. And I think that's part of it. They've done great against teams that are worse than them. And we've talked about how that's really what you look for as a coach, because sometimes the ball bounces weird ways. But, we're a couple of random days from an Oregon dynasty. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, they just woke up and had a bad game plan this day, or this guy was sick or something we didn't know happened. And it just feels like those moments all started to stack up against Lanning. But at the same time, Lanning is so young, and that's what
39,
happens.
Will.
Yeah, 39. Man. That's the other thing. It's like, we want to talk about expectations. Let's not get too down on Lanning, because he's kind of in our age range, especially one of us just having a birthday. I think we're kind of getting a little bit closer to the Dan Lanning age. So point being, I think, they're going to break through. I think they're going to break through. I think there's only so many times that you can be this consistent without that happening. When's that going to happen? How is that going to happen? It can't just be a team of destiny beat you every year. So I think that they're just a big problem, but there's still more to see. But I think for something like a ranking or projecting regular season, I think they are about as set and forget as you can get.
About the only knock that one had against Dan Lanning going into last year was that he did not yet have a Toby Keith win. He did not have a How Do You Like Me Now victory yet. And then they beat Ohio State with the Will Howard slide. And then they lost to Ohio State the way that they did in the playoff. And I'm not saying that it
just
wiped.
Got pushed. I hate this part of modern college football, because it's like, that should have been the end. You should have broken that narrative. That was How Do You Like Me Now. You can't just show up in the playoff and get pushed around. That's not how the sport has ever worked. Sorry.
Yep. No, but you're right, because it kind of wiped it off the table.
Yeah.
And so it almost makes it feel like he now needs to get another win like that. And he needs to go out there and have one of these games where it's not just beating Penn State in a game that everybody expects you to win. And that's probably part of the problem, is that people expect Oregon to win a bunch of games. When your regular season over-under is, 10.5 wins? Yeah, you're not going to be in a lot of those spots. But that type of, hey, we're here, we're different than what the skeptics are saying about us, and we're going to show you that for 60 minutes. That's the type of game that I think Dan Lanning is capable of having this year, even though they lack some of the household names. Mateo Uiagalelei. How about that? What if I told you that there'd be an Uiagalelei who is projected as an obvious first-round pick, and he wasn't DJ? Yeah, just that. Seeing him all over the way too early mocks. But, yeah, this is a really important year, I think, for Dan Lanning to kind of show that, all right, they've arrived and they are not going to have any sort of regression, even though they've had 2 huge, better than imagined hits at quarterback in the portal. All right, Will. Number 1. I've got LSU as my number 1 seed in the college football playoff. How about that?
How about that?
LSU wins the SEC and rocks the 1 seed at 12-1. And for anyone out there thinking, does Will have a gun to your head? No, he doesn't. Will has not blackmailed. Will has not hope merchant. Yeah, I used that right. Will has not hopiumed me into this submission of an LSU pick as the 1 seed. I made this all by my big boy self, all my own analysis here. This is not a blink twice if you're in trouble situation. I'm staring right into the camera. I'm looking you dead in the eye and saying, I believe LSU will have the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. Well, this is as high as I've been on LSU since 2019. And
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to tell the world that. Okay. Even 2023, I voiced my concerns a lot with that defense. I don't think it'd be that bad, Matt House levels of bad, but there were still a lot of concerns going into that year with the secondary. I have concerns about this defense too. I don't necessarily think it's a unit that will be perfect game in, game out. I don't think Harold Perkins turns into a first round guy, and I still think that they have to show that they can handle mobile quarterbacks better. Would like it if Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks were actually healthy throughout this entire offseason. That's not perfect, but they added 18 transfers in this class, and they said, we're pushing our chips in the middle of the table. We are all in, and they went all in all of these different areas where Patrick Payton, Jack Pyburn coming over from Florida, the big one, Mansour Delane coming over from Virginia Tech is a huge, huge addition in that secondary to plug up a lot of different holes that they have had. And gone are the days of the Sage Ryan type secondaries that lack depth and were just out of necessity. I think Brian Kelly last year deserved criticism in the post-spring window because, in my opinion, he publicly made these comments about, oh, it's just a bidding war for all of these guys. And my point was, look, man, I think you're a borderline team. And if you're 1 to 2 guys away from making it to the college football playoff, you're at a place where you're expected to go to the 12-team playoff year in, year out. And you talked me kind of off that ledge saying, look, this isn't a team that's going to win a national championship. They don't have that type of upside. And I hear that. I fully understand that. I think they have looked internally and said, we have a prime opportunity. We have a prime opportunity with Garrett Nussmeier coming back to this roster. And we have the pieces in place, the right coordinator, the right coach to make this happen, to go all in and just say, let's address every need on our roster. Let's go out and get the absolute best that we can and say, let's have it be one of those years at LSU. I am all in. I think they win both at Clemson and at Bama. And then maybe it's a random loss at Ole Miss or something like that. Because I don't think
Sage Ryan revenge game, people are calling it.
Big Sage Ryan revenge game. Sage Ryan ends the game with a pick. How about that?
3 picks on Nussmeier. People are like, what's going on? Sage Ryan's like Mike Jordan wasn't picking him.
Exactly. I think it's a top 5 offense in the sport, maybe like a top 30, top 40 defense, 2022 Tennessee vibes at times. But ultimately, LSU avoids the truly devastating regular season loss, and it earns the 1 seed by beating Georgia in the SEC championship.
Yeah, so this is going to be an incredibly interesting year for LSU. I think this is going to make the second year that was a little bit lower on LSU than you. And the reason was, remember last year, you literally just mentioned it. Defense is so hard to rebuild in a year. And I think they did a fine enough job of that until that one night in College Station. And it's so weird, not to get too deep into the LSU meta here, but there has just been one weird thing that this team has been horrible at every year to Brian Kelly. Year 1, it was special teams. How bad were they? In the opener, they had Malik Neighbors dropping punts, okay, and Mason Taylor missing key blocks. Those are 2 gentlemen that are so good at catching footballs and blocking that they're going to be like franchise changers in the NFL, right? Year 2 was the entirety of the defense. Pretty easy. Last year, interior offensive line and run game with 2 great tackles and Brian Kelly. How did you do that? Great question. I'm trying to figure out what that's going to be for this team, because I don't see it on paper, right? In terms of doesn't seem like there's going to be this big glaring area of need, to go out and add every single level of the portal. And I was not critical of LSU, whenever everybody was burning Brian Kelly for not getting the defensive tackles and everything. Honestly, that part of the defense ended up being okay. To your point, it was about stopping mobile quarterbacks, which isn't really something defensive tackle does, right? And so point being, I don't think they were a player or 2 away last year. I never did. I think they might have been a player or 2 away from a larger embarrassment, maybe sneaking into the playoff and getting smoked by Ohio State, kind of like Tennessee did. And, you see how that goes. But point being, I can't in good faith sit in the rain and watch Brian Kelly lose these opening weekends and pick LSU again. I'm going to try to learn my lesson there. That being said, and I can't sit in the rain in Alabama and watch that Tiger roar and watch us get smoked and text you and be like, I don't think we're going to win today, man. But I think those are the two losses. I think it's Clemson. I think it's Alabama in Bryant-Denny. And I think that this LSU team is going to be really good. I think they're going to be fun to watch. I think that the play calling duties is something that kind of got buried last year, but I think, you had a split play calling situation with two guys that didn't have a ton of experience. The defensive side of the ball was honestly a pleasant surprise, right? But I think Nussmeier has almost gotten underrated because we have all these guys in the SEC. You get Mateer, the transfer. You get the guys that are kind of growing up. And I think that we always try to look at the young guys and the new guys, but I think Nussmeier is starting to be kind of underrated. Caden Durham, what is he going to grow up to? Is he going to have a beard? Is he going to grow more arms? What's it going to be up with him? The receiving core is going to be so interesting. So, yeah, I don't think there's really going to be the hole or the glaring weakness that this LSU team had because, again, like if you kind of look at the team and their records over the last couple of years, like this is like a pretty good team. They're like a 9-10 win team, like at the bowl game. But it's like, no, but they're the best team at some things and they're the worst team at other things. It's not a regular team like this. If they could just clean up the bad, if they could just get rid of these games where it's like, well, again, what are you doing at A&M? LSU should have just won that game. Quarterback attempted, I think, 3 passes in that game, 2 passes and smoked LSU. And so
after coming in, Marshall Reed, yeah.
Yes, Marshall Reed, but he didn't need more. It was a perfect game plan against LSU, who I would say the strength of their defense was their linebackers. Didn't make any sense. But point being, I think Blake Baker is one of the best coaches in the sport. I think Brian Kelly has, just to put a bow on all of this, I think striking out those defensive tackles was I don't think it was like a PR thing, but I think it ended up being one. He turned it into one where it's like, hey, I came here to win, and we're getting outbid on defensive tackles, man. And they came in, they got receivers, they got offensive line, they shored up the entire secondary, and I'm just cautiously optimistic about Brian Kelly at LSU this year. And what it really is Nussmeier and Blake Baker. I think that both of those individuals have shown me enough to where I feel like I trust them.
I wouldn't have said this in early December. Wouldn't have said it. Don't know that I would have said it mid-January. The more I think about it, the more I think this is a team that is just in prime position to win this year. And you're right. If you can avoid that glaring weakness, which it just feels like LSU has had throughout the 2020s, an inevitable Achilles heel that is just going to bite them at multiple instances to prevent them from getting where they want to go. And that even includes 22 regular season finale against A&M.
Yep.
A game where all of a sudden they run into a ground game that just becomes impossible to defend, and they just don't have the defense in place to be able to stay with that. And that was an LSU defense at the time we weren't writing off in the way that we would a year later, obviously. Yeah. But they just always have had these yeah buts. I don't know that this team has that yeah but. Now maybe it'll prove to be they just never found those replacements at tackle, even though they do trust not only the development, but some of the moves that they've made in the portal on the offensive line as a whole. They do trust that that's going to not necessarily make it a weakness of this team. And with a pocket passer and Garrett Nussmeier, you do always wonder about that. And that's fair to point out. But I just think Brian Kelly's time is now.
This is it for Brian Kelly's legacy. Honestly, it's all going to come down to this year. Because being a guy who I felt insane last year going, guys, this team isn't any good. They're not going to be any good. I don't know why everybody has those expectations of them. I'm going, okay, what's your excuse this year? Right? Yeah. Because if we don't do it this year, how can you go in someone's living room and recruit and say, hey, last year I complained and voted everything and I got everything I wanted, but I still lost to Arkansas. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like, you can't do that. And so, point being, like, this is going to be one of the most interesting years in LSU football history, and we know that going into the year because every year LSU is kind of like, they're sneaky, they have the talent, but can they put it together? It's the same song and dance. And sometimes the teams ended up being interesting. They ended up being better or worse than we thought. But this year, it's like, it will be interesting if they aren't a contender. And that's honestly one of the first years that I've felt this way as an LSU fan, knowing how many 8-9 win seasons LSU had, knowing that a lot of that pressure was external and that LSU never really had that in their DNA to be a team like Georgia that was winning 10, 11 games every year. Part of that was the old SEC West, but that's not the case anymore. You don't have to win the SEC West. So, yeah, I think this is it for Brian Kelly. I think that all of the betting on himself, all the how do you like me now comes down to the season. And I'm looking right into the camera as I say, if LSU lets us down and does not make a 12-team playoff this year, I will start calling for Brian Kelly because Amen. That's Yep. And I've been a big defender, but this is it for them.
I agree. All right, let's go back through it. I had Boise State at 12. At 11, I had Louisville. At 10, Texas Tech. 9, Illinois. 8, Alabama. 7, Texas. 6, Ohio State. 5, Clemson. 4, Penn State. 3, Georgia. 2, Oregon. And number 1, your Bayou Bengals, LSU. Anybody there that you were surprised that I left off the board? Because I don't want to say I feel best about my SEC teams because I just feel like those four, I'll be stunned if one of those four teams from the SEC, LSU, Georgia, Bama, Texas, if one of those teams misses the playoff, it will be considered massive, massive news, right? Notre Dame was the one probably that I would get the most pushback on for leaving out, but I think a 10-2 Notre Dame team could get left out. I really do, especially if they lose that game to Boise State. And if Boise State ends up being the group of 5 rep, you're like, all right, well, you got to put Boise State in there. You're going to put them in ahead of a Louisville team that loses 2 games? Not necessarily. So I think that one's going to be a little bit tougher. Notre Dame could be a little bit more up and down offensively, even though they've obviously fallen in love with CJ Carr, a guy that I had originally said would be great in a Tennessee uniform. But apparently, man, they're very, very high on him and not so much Stephen Jelly. But Notre Dame is probably the most noteworthy omission. Could go in a lot of different directions here, but I'm sure like South Carolina fans are listening to this going, hey, what's the pushback there? And we're going to have obviously more in-depth discussions about this.
That's fine.
Shula. Yeah.
Very simple. But let me actually really quick, not to get too deep, but I think that Notre Dame is pretty I think they're recession proof when it comes to the 12 team.
But do they have to go 11-1? Do they have to go 11-1? That's the question that I think we will come away from this year asking. Right.
I mean, but here's the thing about Notre Dame now, though. Like, if you really look, this is a pretty hard schedule, man. As much of a Notre Dame hater as I am, where it's like, I think it's now flipped, where they used to have the perception where it was like, okay, well, they don't play anybody, but they go, they win all these games. I feel like now, when you really look at the teams they could lose to, it's like, I mean, they're going to Arkansas next year.
They played all these neutral site games last year. Well, they had 3 true road games, and they played all these neutral site games. Even when they're playing the service academies, they're playing at neutral sites. They're playing at baseball stadiums. And this year, I do think it's a much more difficult schedule. And maybe I'll eat my words and they'll just be sitting there at 11-1. That's going to be the new standard for Marcus Freeman. But I think they go 10-2. I think they go 10-2 and they get left out. And it's kind of one of those things where people are going, oh, maybe Notre Dame should join a conference, even though they make way too much money to do that at this point.
Yeah, and I mean 7 home games for Notre Dame, and when you think about Notre Dame, their fans travel to the degree that hey, when they play at Boston College, is that going to be a home? So. But again, you kind of look up and down this, and maybe that's just a function of the way college football works now, where every team has a little thing to them, right? But it's you're looking at Boise State here. That is 2. Well, I guess it wouldn't be 2 playoff teams, but it could decide a playoff spot. Again, Arkansas, could we get the Four Loko game right there, right? So yeah, I actually am kind of I said my whole life, if Notre Dame starts scheduling hard teams, I will start respecting them. They started doing it. So I think that a 2, maybe even a 3-loss Notre Dame team, depending on how the losses fall, I think people love them too much that they're finally starting to realize we could schedule anybody. It wouldn't matter. We'll just make more money.
And starting in 27, they'll have the yearly series with Clemson as well. That news came out earlier this week, and that'll be a fun annual rivalry. Those games have been really good, and those games have been fun to be able to watch.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, let's kick it to our guy, David Hale. Fun conversation with someone who provides a perfectly real perspective of the ACC, as well as what it's like to spend 24 hours inside of Buc-ee's. So here is David Hale. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is ESPN's David Hale. David, last week you did something that I bet plenty of people listening to this have almost done on accident, but never quite gone the full 24. Explain the premise, the origins of spending 24 hours in a Buc-ee's with the bet that you lost, the experience, the whole deal.
Yeah. I did not do this of my own volition, much as it might have been something I would have been stupid enough to do at some various point. I have an ongoing bet with my colleague Andrea Adelson at ESPN, going way back to our days when we were both doing the ACC blog, which is a thing that anyone under the age of 30 doesn't remember. But we would pick ACC games. You'd have picks every week. And used to be, it was just our picks went online and everybody could keep track of them. And then when they got rid of the blogs, we just started having our own little competition between the two of us. And eventually, somewhere along the lines, we came up with there is no prize for the winner. I should add this. There's no winning prize. There's only punishment for the loser, which, if you cover the ACC, feels sort of redundant at that point. But that's where we are. So anyway, this year we allowed, what I think is sort of the Mensa of social media, which is my Twitter followers, to decide what the punishment would be. They send in a ton of different ideas. We narrowed it down to 4, put them out for a vote because 4 is the limit that Twitter allows. And the Buc-ee's challenge was the overwhelming winner. And then the real problem with this, or benefit, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it, is I knew by like week 6 there was no chance I was winning this year. So I spent basically since like early October, I have been planning out how this was going to look. So I had a little runway. I also spent a lot of time kind of, I don't know, pondering my own misfortune in the world. You have those moments every now and again where you find yourself someplace that's utterly like incompatible with normal reality, and you start going back through all of the different steps that have led you to this point, and how many different moments you could have just been a responsible adult and done something better, but then here you are. I had a lot of those moments.
I was going to ask you your darkest moment during those 24 hours. I think you just named it. I think that's it.
I will tell you, so most of it was pretty fun, to be honest with you. The folks at Buc-ee's were awesome. They were so like nice and friendly and welcoming and let me do basically whatever the hell I wanted. But there, like 3 a.m. at a Daytona Beach Buc-ee's you don't want to find yourself there via losing a bet or just coincidentally. Like no one is there because they made the right choices in life. They're there for various bad reasons. Even if it's just, I needed gas in Daytona Beach at 3 a.m., you've made some bad choices. So anyway, there was a point, like as I'm getting sort of delirious and I didn't sleep at all, where they play just terrible country music throughout the entirety. Like you don't notice it because there's such a hum inside Buc-ee's all the time because there's so many people. But when it starts to die down in the middle of the night, you start to hear the music and think, boy, this is terrible, terrible country music. And then there reached a point where I was like, I feel like all these songs might be about me. And it was really like the more I hear them, it's all about like just bad decision making and finding yourself in a terrible spot you can't get out of. And then we had a camera crew with us for much of this, but they were lucky enough to go home at night and go to sleep. And then they came back at like 7:15 in the morning, and one of the camera guys is like getting me like rigged up or whatever to do some TV stuff. And he's like, isn't it funny how much these songs all seem to reflect your experience right now? And I'm like, thank you. I'm not a crazy person. So, yeah,
God.
I think Buc-ee's can see into your soul is basically what I'm getting at.
That's a fantastic takeaway, and I'm pretty sure I've been to that Buc-ee's, and I know the vibe that you're describing. Now, I was there not at 3 a.m., and I was there during normal hours on the way up to what would have been like Savannah, driving from Orlando. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got to imagine you ran into college football fans. Did you have a college football encounter that you'll take with you away from this Buc-ee's experience, besides the fact that Buc-ee's saw into your soul?
I don't want to be take what was a very fun thing and turn it into a very serious thing because it was meant to be fun. I came away just in general like I need to start talking to strangers more. Like I need to meet more people. I need to get outside of my comfort zone more. Like I had such a great experience just like talking to anyone who was there. And like a big part of this, like again, we had cameras there, so they were like, go make an ass out of yourself type of thing. So I was sort of forced into doing it. And almost every one of these interactions was rewarding at some level. But 2 college football ones that stood out. Number one, we went around just sort of like basically talking to random people who were pumping their gas there. And one of them was this dude who turns out to be cousins with Kai Robichaux, who is Boston College's starting running back the last couple of years and like helps train Kai. And I was like, I know Kai. I've talked to him several times. And so, we had like this bonding moment of like, what are the odds we run into, each other at a gas station, and then I was just taking selfies with people like right before I was getting ready to leave, and I see a woman wearing an App State T-shirt, and I live in Charlotte, and I was like, did you go to App? And she's like, no, my husband went to App. He actually played football there. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And I was like, well, can I take a picture with you? And she's like, yeah, but take one with my husband too. So I took a selfie with him, and she's like, he was actually on the team that beat Michigan at the Big House. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. But like, I was getting ready to leave. Like, it was towards the end of my 24 hours. And so I'm being dragged in like 10 other directions. So I didn't actually get to talk to the guy, really. I just talked to his wife for a couple minutes. And so I posted the picture on social media. And Mike Flynn, who's the SID at Georgia Tech now, texted me and he's like, do you know who that was? And I was like, no. And he's like, that was the starting center on the team that beat Michigan. And he started as a true freshman because the two guys ahead of him on the depth chart got hurt in fall camp. His first start of his career as a true freshman went to the Big House and beat Michigan with App State. And I was like, well, shit, I wish I had talked to him for a little bit.
All right, so what's the bet for next year? Because I think 24 hours in a Piggly Wiggly would be even more on brand for you. That's kind of the next iteration of this.
Yeah. So, I did some thinking about this because had Andrea lost, which again, there was no chance of this by mid-October, but had she lost, like I feel like as a good human being as I am, I would have felt a little bit concerned about letting her stay in a Buc-ee's for 24 hours. And also like, I will not like that 24 hours has probably taken years off my life based on like the lack of sleep and the sheer amount of calories of sugar and beef that I consumed. So I feel like this year's bet, and we haven't decided yet. I don't know if we'll put it up to a vote this time, but it needs to be less about endurance and more about sheer embarrassment. So I think, it needs to be punitive, clearly. And I should say there was plenty of people out on the social media verse that did not find this punitive. They said, I would have loved to have done this. I don't know why this went to the loser. This is a winner's thing. So I'm taking suggestions. If anybody out there has some suggestions, I'm open to ideas. We're looking for something funny, embarrassing, something that theoretically we could put on TV without running afoul of the FCC, and that does not place anyone in any immediate danger, though long-term danger I'm more open to.
Just the Hill at Clemson, just 24 hours on the Hill. Just everything you do, you're like, I'm on a hill. What is wrong with this? You can't sleep,
but see, the problem,
walking.
Dabo would be out there the entire time with you, just talking your ear off. Like, he basically just hangs out there anyway, I assume.
That's a good point. Let's talk some Clemson, because I feel like the pendulum has swung so far that it now feels like Clemson is probably more interesting than it's been since maybe like 2018, first year of Trevor Lawrence. Dabo's portal approach, I think we could say, has shifted just ever so slightly.
Nudged it, yeah.
Like he's got Bill Connolly's number one team in the country in percentage of returning production, which I value that greatly. I talk about it throughout the offseason. And it's a year in which you're the overwhelming favorite to win the ACC. Does Clemson have a true national title winning ceiling this year?
It is a really good question, because I've seen too much of Clemson over the last few years to like totally think like, it's all back to normal. I think there are, if you go back and sort of look at the nadir of Clemson, which was 9-4, so not exactly a nadir, but for them, like, what were the problems? I think there was not as good. The coaching staff wasn't good. I mean, Dabo hired people without a lot of previous on-field experience, and there wasn't a lot of voices that were not Clemson voices. That has shifted. Garrett Riley and Tom Allen as the coordinators now. He's brought in some other folks, Mike Rump from the NFL and a bunch of guys. So I think that's better. The receiving core had atrophied completely from a place that during the 2010s was considered wide receiver U, from Sammy Watkins and Nuke Hopkins down to T. Higgins and Mike Williams. They are much better there now. Bryant Wesco was a star last year. I think TJ Green is going to be really good. Antonio Williams is already really good. They've got some depth at receiver right now. The quarterback situation really fell off of a cliff. Cade Klubnik is not, I don't think, ever going to be Trevor Lawrence, not at the college level. But he has improved every year. I mean, you don't need to be a genius or an X of the nose guy to see, like, he is markedly better last year than the year before. So if you follow a trend line and assume he continues to get better, I think that problem is, again, he's not going to be Trevor Lawrence, but I think he can certainly be a guy who you can win at a high level with. And then I thought the defense, regressed after Brent Venables left, but in some ways regressed in a very specific way, which was they did not cause chaos at the line of scrimmage the way they did under Venables. And then you bring in Tom Allen, and that's sort of his bread and butter. So I think they're going to want to be a lot more aggressive at the line of scrimmage than they had been. So you saw that. So you kind of go down the check boxes of all the things that I thought were holding Clemson back, and they have addressed them. Have they addressed them to the level where they can be what Ohio State was last year? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say you can't win a national championship with Cade Klubnik, but you could with Will Howard. I think they've got a lot of the pieces there. But, I mean, again, they had a lot of these pieces sans the defensive coordinator last year that they lost to South Carolina in a game they had no business losing. They got whipped by Louisville. They got whipped by Georgia. They were in that Texas game. I think they probably could have won that game. But, there are – I don't know. I would say if I was a betting man, I would bet they make the playoff. I bet they have a bye in the playoff. I don't know if I'm picking them as I wouldn't feel great about picking them as a national champion right now.
Ian Shefflin, he has become a very unique story.
Biggest transfer landing. He transferred from the basketball team.
Biggest in every possible way because dude's 6'8", 240. And every time I watched him, he fouled out of a game. So he already plays basketball like a football player. Now he's trying to try and play football. Dabo pitched him on this, and I'm sure that Dabo brought up someone like Mo Alley Cox, who didn't play organized football until he hadn't played organized football since his true freshman year of high school, and then went to the NFL and is now having a decade-long career. But what should we know about this whole thing? Because for Dabo to go out and kind of jokingly throw this out there and then seriously act on it to make it happen, it's a unique story. And if we're looking up and this guy is catching touchdown passes in a college football playoff game, it feels like we're going to be beaten over the head with it.
Yeah. So one, he does have the basic body type. It's funny. I was like, so what do you what's your size you're trying to get to for the season? He's like, well, I'm 240 right now. I'd like to be 240 at the start of the season, but I need to move that 240 around a little bit. He's got a basketball 240 body. He needs a football 240 body. And then, he clearly has, the arm length and all of that stuff. Like Dabo saw this stuff, which is Dabo's not an idiot. Dabo loves an underdog story more than anybody has ever loved an underdog story. So I'm sure he sees that part of it. You mentioned Mo Alley Cox. That is actually somebody that Ian Shefflin reached out to prior to deciding on this and talked to him about it. But there's a pretty good, just around ACC schools. You got Tony Gonzalez, Julius Peppers, Charlie Ward, obviously, kind of Greg Paulus. There's a bunch of guys who have sort of done both with some level of success. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Antonio Gates went from basketball player at Kent State to a Hall of Fame NFL tight end. So this is doable. And I think Dabo's, not an idiot. He sees the at least framework. One of the interesting things is Shefflin played football growing up until his freshman year in high school, and then gave it up to focus on basketball. One of his teammates that whole time coming up through Pop Warner into high school was Phil Maffa, who was the running back for Clemson the last 4 years. So I have no doubt that Phil has put in some words with Dabo, I saw him on the field. He looked pretty good. It's been a long time since the dude's been hit. Football at the college level is a lot different than playing, Pop Warner in Northwest Georgia. So I'm not going to predict this works out. I think it's still a long shot. But if you're Dabo, why not roll the dice? What if it turns out you've got the next Antonio Gates on your hands? I think it'll be a fun story if it happens. And if it doesn't, everybody will forget about it in a couple of weeks.
At the very least, play him on some 12 personnel packages and, just kind of see what you have and say, dude, you're not going to call for a foul by going into doing what you want to do.
You can box out and you can get up and grab a ball. At the very least, you put him in the red zone and see what happens, right? It's not, those body types don't come around very often. So even if you don't have a lot of refined route running or blocking skills, there are packages you can put in for somebody who just looks like that.
Dabo's clearly getting creative. It's one of the stories of the year in all of college football. He's still searching for his first New Year's Six bowl victory or playoff victory in the 2020s. The ACC as a whole is still searching for its first New Year's Six or playoff bowl victory in the 2020s. We're just passing the halfway mark of the decade. What's the biggest reason that drought exists?
They haven't been that good. That's the long and short of it is they haven't been that great. But look, would they have had a chance to win some of these games if they hadn't had some of the opt-outs? Like I think back Carolina, the year they lost to Texas A&M. Like that was a really good North Carolina team that almost won that game as it is, and they played without like 5 starters that went on to play in the NFL. So I think some of it is just like the modern college football is that if you're not playing a big name game, like if you were in the Orange Bowl and that wasn't a playoff game, like I don't know how some of those guys didn't play. But most of it has just been like the ACC has not been great. Like Florida State has been down, and obviously you look at the big game that they could have played, that an injury ruined all of that. Clemson and SMU both had their chances last year. I mean, that ended up kind of a blowout, Penn State and SMU, but there was that pick six that Kevin Jennings threw, and one of just the worst decisions you'll ever see a college quarterback make. Like if that goes the other way and it should have been an easy first down, well, then you've got a whole different ball game. So the margins aren't big, but the ACC has regressed enough that the margins don't favor them right now. But again, I think Clemson can get there this year. I think Miami's going to be good this year. I'll tell you the team that I think has a chance to be very good this year that not a ton of people are talking about is Louisville. No. And they've slowly been building. They've done a really good job at the portal. Jeff Brom is a brilliant offensive mind. And then I think, he did a great job with Tyler Shuck last year to the point that he gets Tyler Shuck drafted in the second round. I think they might have a more talented quarterback in Miller Moss this year and surrounding him with more to work with at the skill positions and a really good offensive line. Louisville's a team that's going to be fun. They're going to put up points this year.
Is Mike Norvell a dead man walking, or is the Thomas Castellanos Gus Malzahn reunion, I guess we can call it that, is that going to be enough to prevent FSU from forking over a $54 million buyout?
I write our Saturday night column I try to write like sort of a humorous take on the Saturday of slate of games that runs late Saturday night, Sunday morning every week. And when they hired Gus Malzahn, when that news came out on a Saturday, I wrote a thing about it in that column, and I joked like this is the first step towards a Week 6 game where we talk about Thomas Castellanos, their new transfer quarterback, throwing 6 interceptions in a loss. And then, of course, they go out and get Thomas Castellanos. Like, it was so in the cards. I will say Castellanos fits the mold of a quarterback that Malzahn has had relative success with, from Nick Marshall, James Franklin, John Reese Plumlee, like those guys. He fits that mold. He is not Jordan Travis. He is not going to solve any major quarterback problems that Florida State has basically had outside of Jordan Travis since Jameis Winston was on campus. And I don't think he is a guy that you can win the ACC with. And the fact that the part of the problem last year, the difference between them being 7-5 and 2-10 was a culture issue. Like they lost a lot of games and gave up down the stretch because they were not what they were hoping to be. Thomas Castellanos got benched last year and quit the team. Like, I don't know if that solves your culture issue. So I have concerns. That said, you go look at Bill Connolly had a thing out last week looking at like luck-based metrics for teams and who has like – it was a perfect shitstorm for Florida State last year. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. So I think just sheer regression to the mean probably gets them to 6-6 this year. What saves Mike Norvell's job? I would say 6-6 probably doesn't. 7-5, you're probably having some unpleasant conversations. 8-4, he stays. That's kind of where I'm thinking their window is. Can they get to 8-4? I think it's entirely possible, yes.
I've been out since we heard that Gus was taking over the offense. I'll be honest. Not a Gus guy.
I don't necessarily blame you. I don't think this is a long-term – like, this is part of my problem with it. And I will say the defensive coordinator that hired Tony White I think is excellent.
Yeah.
But the whole Gus Malzahn thing felt like we got to stop the bleeding. This will be a bandage that will fix the immediate problem although we will probably end up with some long-term problems as a result of it. But this is a stop the bleeding Band-Aid. Again, I think that leaves them. I don't think this addresses the larger issue. And the larger issue, frankly, is they have not been able to recruit a quarterback at Florida State in 12 years now. Jameis Winston was a 2012 signee. Look at everyone that they have signed since then, either portal or not. And aside from Jordan Travis, who was a complete write-off in the Willie Taggart era, they have had one just terrible, not bad, terrible situation after another. And so, look, like at some point, you got to figure out what the hell's going wrong with that. The most important position on the field that going back 3 coaching staffs have completely mismanaged now.
Yeah, and even Kromenhawk was a guy that they were kind of banking on being the future, and then he ends up transferring to Mississippi State, and you're like, wow, just like that, you can't even keep him in house either.
Chuba Purdy, who was like supposed to be a guy, totally flamed out and fell down Nebraska, then San Diego State, and now I think is in FCS. And then AJ Duffy. Oh, I might be confusing them. Maybe AJ Duffy. Basically, they're the same quarterback in which they could not do anything. And these are guys who were top 10 quarterbacks being recruited and have utterly flamed out. So where's the problem there?
I'd love to entertain, before you go here, I'd love to entertain some possible Florida State candidates with you. Not that Mike Norvell is out of a job just yet or anything like that, but just in theory, because this is what we do. It's May in college football. This is what we talk about. Dion. That's my list. That's my list.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And let me ask you this, because I trust your opinion here. Are we sold on Dion? Like, did last year prove that Dion, he's good? We're good? We believe in Dion?
Dion is like an NFL quarterback prospect. We always assume that, with college coaches, if you're good, it'll work out. You need alignment. If you don't have that right, perfect alignment, your variance can be all over the place. And I think there are a lot of situations where Dion would have gone to a few years ago and it wouldn't have worked out. Now, I think he's working out at Colorado. I think he's doing exactly what they could have hoped he would do. But does that mean that it would work at a lot of other places? No. The idea of him at Auburn made no sense whatsoever, even though we could look at it and go, well, hey, Auburn's a losing program. Dion is a winning coach now. Why can't that work? Well, it's like, you still need someone that's on board for all of that stuff. Brian Harsin wasn't on board for any of that stuff, and we saw how that ended so quickly.
One of the other teams that I think he had some interest in, and at least there were folks in power that thought about it, was Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine a worse fit than that. And it's funny because the guy that they have now, who they just promoted from within, is Brent Key, who could not be more of 180 degrees away from Deion Sanders, and they get to play this year. I'm looking forward to that.
Matt Campbell, John Summerall, Kurt Signetti, and then the one that you have to throw in just because it'd be a coaching search would be Lane. But that would be like the actual list of what I think FSU would be really interested in if it got to that point.
I concur. I think Summerall would be a really good fit there. I think the first shot that they take is Lane Kiffin, though. And him and Michael Alford go back a long ways. They've known each other since their USC days. I think that if there were no other obstacles, like that would work.
Yeah.
But money is an obstacle at Florida State. So
you mean paying $54 million for a buyout? That would have ramifications. Yeah. Okay.
It'd be funny to see the buyout for Florida State's current coach added to the buyout from their former coach who got bought out of A&M. You put those together, like that's the GDP of a small nation.
Doing some quick math, 20 carry. That's $130 million. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Golly. Okay, since your ACC predictions got you into Buc-ee's for 24 hours, let's get you out of here with a bold prediction. You already threw out the Louisville possibility of Louisville being one of those dark horse candidates with Jeff Brom, but what is a bold ACC prediction that won't make you look dumb, or maybe could at least prevent you from spending 24 hours at a certain place?
I mean, the easy part of me saying this is I don't think Carolina is going to be any better this year than they were last year. I think they might actually be decently worse. I think Belichick is a one and done there. I think he's gone after this season. How invested he is depends on who you talk to. If things go well, the NFL is going to want him back. If things don't go well, I think there's going to be enough push. Like people at Carolina didn't want him. Certain people at Carolina didn't want him to begin with. I don't know. The whole thing just feels so. Again, you talk about alignment. There's zero alignment there right now. And that feels like a powder keg waiting to explode if things don't go great. And I can certainly envision a scenario where things don't go great.
I mean, what's happened so far? It's been kind of, ho-ho, nothing really going on.
And here's the genuine thing. Like, I'm not like follow the celebrity scandal stuff. I frankly don't care about his girlfriend. Like, cool, you're dating a girl 50 years younger than you. Like, I get it. Like, we don't need to read between the lines there. I understand what's happening. Like, instead of focusing on the fact that he's letting her theoretically mismanage his media, like, who gives a shit about that? He's got two of his own kids, one of his GM's kids, Bob Diaco. Like, these are the people running his actual football team. Maybe we should talk about that, because that feels like the nepotism that's problematic.
You have just prompted me to go back down a Bob Diaco deep dive. And for those that know, you feel the strain. Somebody's going to understand that reference, and they're going to say, Bob Diaco, man, that's that. Not Jordan. We shouldn't be talking about her. Bob Diaco. That's the one that could be Bill Belichick's undoing. David, you're the best. Hopefully the next time you're on, we'll be discussing our Cubs in a pennant race. Is that?
Hey, they somehow best run differential in the majors, tied for fourth in the NL for best record. I don't know. We'll figure out a way to screw this up.
That just means the wins are coming. Even more wins are coming. They are facing good teams in the first part of the schedule. Good things are ahead. Really, really appreciate the time, man.
Yep, good to see you.
Lad of the week, Will. You want me to start? You want to start?
Go ahead.
I'm going to start with Tyrese Halliburton. Golly, that shot that he hit on Tuesday night. The step back, gets his own rebound, a little Walter Clayton-esque, just saying.
Mm-hmm.
To be clutch in those moments is one thing. To be that clutch after an entire visiting stadium chants overrated at you, to be that clutch after The Athletic comes out with that story saying that you're the most overrated player in the NBA, to be that clutch when your dad goes nuclear and for whatever reason decides to get in the face of Giannis, and then you have to apologize basically on his behalf.
Which, outside of Draymond Green, the guy that you least want to get into his face, because, come on.
Yeah, up there.
Yeah.
Very, very much up there. But, yeah, Halliburton's just unbelievable. And it's still crazy to think that the Pacers got him at that time in his career, and they didn't have to draft him, and that was a trade with the Kings. But that shot was insane. Absolutely insane. Now, I'll admit, wasn't locked into that one. I mentioned before, we're season 3 of Ted Lasso. That took priority in our household, but it was definitely oh my God, Lauren, did you see what just happened? Lauren, who grew up a Pacers fan, probably going to tune into a few more of these games. Probably going to be getting a few more texts from my father-in-law, who is not as crazy as Tyrese Halliburton's dad. And that's a win. Will, I was thinking about this as it relates to dads doing crazy things at sporting events.
Okay.
What is the craziest thing you've ever seen a dad do at a sporting event that you were at, that you witnessed in person?
Oh, man. Gosh, man, me personally, I don't think I've seen a ton. I've seen a bunch of people like jawing with refs. I've seen people get like DQ'd, like thrown out. I was thinking about making this joke earlier. Now we're talking about a third sports dad. Here's my elevator pitch here. I'm going to start a GoFundMe or an LLC where I just take sports dads and I send them to space for the entirety of their son's season. So Uyunglele, Iamaleava, Halliburton, if your dad is causing some issues, we're going to get with Jeff Bezos. We're going to put the dads into orbit to where they can't have any contact. I think that would do a ton.
Uyunglele's dad cause problems?
What's up?
Uyunglele's dad?
Oh, not now, but with the first one, like DJ, he was like jawing with fans on Twitter like constantly, and now I think he's learned a little bit. But that was part of DJ's progression, as his dad was talking a bunch of smack on his son's behalf.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's nothing wrong with sending some dads to space.
Mm-hmm. And they love it. They learn so much.
Yeah, fun time. But they could still watch the games, just be as far away as humanly possible to be able to actually get on the court and do something stupid. I remember growing up, God, I must have been like 10 or 11. There was this pitcher, Matt Gall, stud, threw absolute gas. The type of guy that when I faced him when I was 14 and I saw his breaking ball, I said, oh, that's what a major league breaking ball looks like. I don't think he ended up doing anything big time in college or anything like that, but he was a god growing up. Went to Stevenson High School, Jalen Brunson, Stevenson High School. Mm-hmm. And his dad was once, I believe, so upset with balls and strikes in a travel baseball game that he rode his motorcycle onto the field and started doing laps, which is just a safety liability to begin with. Mm-hmm. I think you've made your point the second you rev your engine with the motorcycle and you're within earshot of an umpire that you don't agree with. But to physically ride it out there. And he was one of these guys. He had like the crazy hair. He had the look down. Let's just say that. When you heard, oh yeah, that's a guy who like rode his motorcycle on into the field, you're like, yeah, that checks out. That makes a lot of sense. But that dude, I remember being so scared to face him, in part because of his dad, because of how intimidating his dad was. And maybe that was kind of his big picture vision of, I'm going to make my son the most intimidating pitcher he can possibly be, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help. I can tell you, he was a hitter who had to stand in the batter's box. It worked. It really, really worked.
His dad's just like reloading a shotgun behind you. You're like, you know what? I'm just not going to swing. That's fine.
Yeah. You have this one. Whatever. I'm just going to intentional strikeout. I'm just going to make my way to the dugout. This at bat's not that important. You need this more than I do. Maybe Tyrese Halliburton's dad was just doing that for him because everybody says he's not intimidating and he's just this nice guy. So he's just doing what he can. As a dad, let me tell you, I get it.
I can't wait for you to have that like moral crisis if that something happens like that to Claire, where like she gets like a bad strike call or something. You're like, ugh.
I don't know how I'm going to handle it, man. I've thought about that a lot. And there will be little things that come up at daycare where like, oh, like the other day she got like scratched at daycare or something like that. And you're like, who did this to you? And it's like,
you can't fight a baby.
A baby.
If it's like 17, 18-year-old guy, you might be able to fight him, is all I'm saying.
Exactly. Like those things are going to come up in her life. And man, I hope I have the right perspective to not react irrationally in those situations. But I guarantee you, if you had asked Tyrese Halliburton's dad before the game, you think you're going to go up to Giannis after this one? You think you're going to be that juiced up that you're going to do this? He would have said no. So
yeah,
you just never know. You go where the moment takes you.
You'll love this. After the dad thing happened, I tweeted. It was immediately cold take. Congrats to Tyrese Halliburton, who has finally done something interesting in his career. And then he immediately just did something even more interesting. So
he's dunking on everybody.
He just absolutely. It's like, don't mess with my dad, I guess, and they powered up. So transition now to I guess this is very, very related. Yeah. So Timothée Chalamet, I like him as much as I can like a skinny dude. I've decided. My favorite dudes in this world are kind of a little bit swole, like the offensive line, Brett Bielema style. But Timothée Chalamet, I was wrong about him. I owe him an apology. He's a ball knower. You see him on College game day. He was bringing the heat. He was one of the best guest pickers they've ever had.
He was awesome.
He was awesome. He was like genuinely like maybe the best guest picker ever. And again, he chose to prove that this like year's Met Gala, which happened obviously last weekend. And I love this like kind of subheader, like the lead of this on TMZ. Timothée Chalamet had a pretty good reason to let Kylie Jenner fly solo at the Met Gala. His NBA team was playing an important playoff game, and he had to watch.
Big Knicks fan, yep.
He was just watching the Knicks on an iPad instead of being at the Met Gala. And buddy, he's so cool. I don't get it. I don't get how someone of those dimensions has so much swag, has so much BDE, for lack of a better word. He's just sitting here, and he like posted on his story, bleep myself, this game is insane. And then he was shaking what a win on this story. And you could literally see he put a story of like, him watching on an iPad, because I'm sure everybody was looking for him. Okay, where's your girl at? Like, where are you at? What's your fit looking like? Buddy, I am wearing sweatpants. I am watching the Knicks. I am crying. I am screaming. I'm probably sweating. And we've all been there, where our team is doing something really important and we have something important going on. And honestly, shout out to him for being able to take that personal decision. And it probably worked out even better for his brand. I love that when people are true to themselves and it works out for them.
Well, I was thinking about this I don't even pretend to be like, I need to see every movie he's in. Like I haven't seen the Dune movies, and I probably should at some point. And I guarantee you, I haven't seen A Complete Unknown. I haven't seen that yet. I'm trying to like look through his IMDb right now, because I really am not like Interstellar. Okay, you see something like that, but I'm not one of these people that's sitting here pretending all of his movies are awesome, top of my list, appointment viewing type things. But I've mentioned before how, and I mentioned this when we had Chris Budden on, the things that I've done a 180 on in this life, have realized as an adult, oh, I was wrong about this, and this original take that I had looks really stupid. I was thinking that Chalamet has now fallen into that category because about like 6-7 years ago, I just didn't get it, and I didn't understand why he's so captivating as an actor and why people seem to be obsessed with his every move. I think I kind of get it, and I'm in now.
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm in. And I if that makes me basic, that's fine. Would love to have a beer with Chalamet, and I'm not afraid to say it.
Well, and you know what's funny too? Like, so me and like Andrea, like she had a profile on my like Max, and she was like, I'm gonna make this the weirdest picture I can, and it was him from like one of the Walker movies, and she was like, oh, it's freaky, right? And then I started learning more about him. I was like, you can keep that because I think he's awesome now. Have you seen the thing with him and Landry Fields?
I have not seen that.
Oh,
No.
this is the craziest thing he's done. It's actually kind of crazier than the other two. So there's a tweet from 2010, it's Landry Fields during like the mellow years or during like Linsanity, really, like right around there. And it says, me and my friend will be in the city tonight starting at 5. The first person to find us and answer our trivia questions wins 2 tickets. And there's a picture of like what has to be like 12-year-old Timothy Chalamet who just found Landry Fields and answered like NBA trivia. And he's just like, with Landry Fields, who was much more famous with him at that point, and he was some random dude, and they're like, yeah, shout out, and there's like the follow-up tweet, it says, the contest is over, Tim Chalamet is the winner, found him at Grand Central Station, congrats Tim, see you at the game. It's just like a random fan, it's like he's been about this his whole life, this is not a bit.
No, he's true sports fan. Look, the college game day prep was astonishing, all right? Like he went up there and absolutely nailed it in ways that I don't think many people have in that role, and he didn't have to. He could have just said 6 words, kept it moving, and been totally fine. And instead, actually did his homework. So we respect Chalamet. We are Chalamet respecters on this podcast. Absolutely. All right, I know that was a lot. That was a ton of stuff. That was hopefully an interesting part 1 to this part 2 that we're going to be doing with the playoff, rolling out what we think the playoff will break down and end up shaking out with a national champion. We will do that next week. So that will be the plan. Unless something crazy comes up, of course. It's May. You know this. But because it's May, you know, there is NBA playoffs going on, MLB as well. Again, use that promo code with Dabble, SDS2 on Dabble. Get $25 in bonus cash, no deposit required. Please leave us a 5-star review. Please do that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast, plus a bunch of original content as well. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.